It's 185 days until Christmas 2020, and today we have a special guest. Elizabeth Wein agreed to join me in an interview today to talk about her book, Cobalt Squadron. I read this over the last couple weeks, and I think it is a fantastic novel. Uh, I covered it a little bit on Friday, and I reached out to Elizabeth. She agreed to talk to me. I messed up the beginning of the recording of our interview. It picks up it when we're talking about what she was first introduced to Star Wars in, and she's telling the story about watching Star Wars in 1977 when she was 12 years old, and that's where we pick up the video. But I want to encourage you. I'm going to put some links in the description to the Cobalt Squadron novel. If you would please just go check that out. I listened to it in a public library audiobook. It is a wonderful, wonderful book, and I came into it with absolutely no expectation. I wasn't expecting that it would be good or bad. Just had really very little interest. But when I listened to the book, it absolutely blew me away. Uh, One of my favorite books that I've listened to in the last year. Uh, I, I put it up there with maybe number three or four in the books I've listened to. So uh, take a listen to the interview. Again, I apologize for the beginning being a little messed up, but and then if you would check out Elizabeth's other books that she's written. She was so generous with her time today, and I truly appreciated it. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and I hope that you'll reach out and look up Cobalt Squadron and give it a try. I believe you'll like it. Thanks so much, and thanks for being here. We'll talk to you guys later.
The title. I thought, it's going to be science fiction. I'm not really into that. It's going to be a lot of people shooting at each other. It's going to be boring. And I was very wrong. And I have to say that what really caught my attention in that movie, when I was 12 years old, was Princess Leia and and her strength and her defiance and the interrogator relationship with Darth Vader and that was something that I was like busy making up a story about in a World War II setting, even when I was 12.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, she was a character that I could, really just admire and relate to, but I liked all the characters. I would be hard pressed to say that I had a favorite. And when The Empire Strikes Back came out, I was 15, and that was a life-changing movie for me. And I will be the first to admit that it's probably not the best of them all, although I still think it's a really good film, but it was the one that really kind of got me the most. And I saw it 13 times in the cinema the summer that it came out. And I changed the courses that I was taking. I was about to start my junior year in high school. I changed what I was doing because I was inspired by the movie. And it really was it resonated for me. And yeah, and I wanted to be a writer at the same time I was making up my own stuff. And although I didn't write science fiction, it influenced me in terms of the way you structure a story and the way characters interact. So it's been with me, that was the beginning. And of course, then they redigitalized the movies, in the 90s, and I got to see them all again. And then the new ones started coming out and I got to see them. So yeah, Star Wars was always like a huge, big thing for me. And I don't know how much you know about my background as a writer.
Not a whole lot, right? I read I went to your webpage and I read about what you're working on, where you live, and what's going on in your life. But I don't know that much about your background at all.
Okay, so I wrote from like the mid 90s to the mid 2000s. I wrote a series of books that were kind of a mashup of Arthurian fantasy and 6th century Ethiopia. And these books were very well reviewed, but they didn't sell very well. And my editor at the time said, you need to do something a little more mainstream. And that I had just got a private pilot's license and I wanted to write about flying. So I wrote a book that was set in World War II, which I mentioned I had been into when I was 12. Wow. So there was, there's a big connection there. And that book became Codename Verity, which I have sitting here to wave at the screen. And this book was published in 2012. In March of this year, it became a #1 New York Times bestseller.
Wow.
So and that was a big surprise, actually. But it was the book that changed my life. And it is it's about 2 young women. One of them is a pilot. One of them is a spy in World War II. And the spy gets captured and her mission is going terribly wrong. And the pilot tries to rescue her. Oh. So I wrote that book. And as I say, it changed my life. And it was through this, it was because I had made kind of a name for myself as someone who writes about women pilots, really, that I came to the attention of an editor at Lucasfilms. I actually can't remember where this began, where what I'm telling you now began, but this tells you a bit about my journey. I was contacted. I know what I was going to say. What I was going to say was that I became pretty well known as a writer. I have 5 more books that followed this one, and I honestly don't. I have to sit and count to tell you the exact number, but I've got quite a few published books out there. And I do school visits and I talk to kids and they say to me, where do you get your ideas? And I would always respond to them, Star Wars. And so that was my, easy, because that's a hard question to ask a writer. Where do you get your ideas? I get them from all kinds of different places, but the easy answer that I would always go back to was Star Wars. And I could point to little, funny little scenes in my books and relationships between characters and say, that was influenced by that, and that was influenced by that. And the kids would relate to that and they would think it was funny. But I kind of can't do that anymore because now I've written a Star Wars book. Wow. But that actually also, I might as well continue that thread and tell you how I came to write Cobalt Squadron, which was that they, as I'm sure you're aware because you read them all, there are many different books that are produced in connection with the various different films and the various different threads, and they wanted a middle grade novel to go with The Last Jedi, and because they had a character who was a woman and was involved in a bomber crew, someone there who knew that I had written these World War II books about female pilots said, wouldn't it be cool if we could get Elizabeth Wein to write for us? And this came to me they went through my agent, and I got an email from my agent, which arrived at 11:30 at night, early in, what year did The Last Jedi come out? 2017? Yeah. And so it was early in the year. It was in January. And I thought it was spam. I thought my agent was forwarding me some note that had come from some fan saying, wouldn't it be cool if we could get Elizabeth Wein to write this fiction for us. As kind of a long shot, but it would be the coolest thing ever. And I'm reading this, I'm going, I'm gonna write fiction for you. Write your own fan fiction.
Right. Yeah.
and and then I looked at they were talking about nowhere did it say anything about Star Wars. Okay. It said episode 8. And I'm going, what are we all so familiar with that we just refer to by episode numbers? What is this person even talking about? And I was like, oh, could this be Star Wars? And I was like, nah, we're not up to episode 8 already, are we? And then I was like, wait, we are. And then I noticed that that the address in the email was Lucasfilm.
Oh.
And at that point, I was like, and I was so excited, I couldn't speak. And my son, who was at the time 17, he was like in this room watching, and I was in a different room, and he was watching television, playing a game or something. And I came in and I went, Star Wars. Of course, he had no idea what I was talking about, but it was like the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And my agent was like, okay, are you sure you want to do this? I was like, yes, I'll do it. I don't care what they pay me. I'll do it for free.
That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome. So when they gave that to you, had the movie already been released?
No. This was in January of 2017. The movie, everybody knew the movie was coming out, but nobody knew a darn thing about it. And so they told me about the characters in it. Like, this was all before anybody knew anything about it. So like, I knew who I was going to be writing about. And my remit basically was to write a story about Rose and Paige that was going to make everybody want to fly with these two girls and love them for the rest of their lives. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. Yeah. And then I got to, and so I pretty much got to make up the story myself. I was not given any direction on it, apart from the fact that I had to keep it quite limited in terms of its time frame to allow other stories to be written around it.
Wonderful.
And what was the other thing? Oh yeah, so then I got I went down to Pinewood in London and got locked in a room with the script on a iPad and spent a day reading the screenplay.
Oh,
like 10 months before it was released.
Oh boy. That's super exciting.
Yeah. So I mean, it was the whole experience, from beginning to end was just a delight. It was such a thrill to be working on this, and also to have new characters. I knew kind of from getting familiar with the script what Rose was like, but to a certain extent, I got to put a lot of my own creative efforts into making her a more rounded character, and obviously Paige as well.
Yeah. Well, so I don't want to, for anybody that hasn't read the book yet, I don't want to give away the ending or anything, but there's at the end they meet Admiral Holda. So you picked that out of the script as you were going through there? Is it?
Oh no, I was actually. I think there was some. I can't remember actually what the little fine tuning was, but I worked with an editor on it, and Holdo was suggested to me as a character who would be a good person to fill in this particular role, and I mean, of course, obviously that made sense.
Right.
At that point, I realized that I really needed to, I hadn't done this, I really needed to watch The Force Awakens again.
Yeah.
So that was my work.
Well, that's a tough job. For anybody that's a fan of Star Wars, as you mentioned, since you were 12, we're a similar age group because I had very similar experiences to you. Very, very similar. I also saw Star Wars. It wasn't New Hope at the time, but I saw Star Wars in the theaters July of '77. So just before my birthday, and that was sort of my birthday thing. And we
Yeah.
got to see that as I was in grade school at the time. And of course, the thing that impacted my memory was seeing that destroyer come in, and it just keeps coming.
Right.
And like science fiction movies weren't all that. Just before that, there was a lot of stop motion stuff and kind of long
Yeah.
characters that
Yeah.
that looked weird. And so Star Wars changed all of that, right? It just completely changed everything. And so
It's aged well too. I mean, you watch that movie now, and like it doesn't look cheesy.
no, there are things that are certainly dated, but you're right, it's not cheesy outside of what it has ever been, right? So
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's just fantastic. So to have as your homework to go back and watch more Star Wars, that's great. I wanted to put on. So I shared a couple questions before we sat down. Wanted to see. Well, you've answered many of them, right? How much was Lucasfilm involved in? I know the other part is Rose is very technical. She has lots of technical skills. She's an innovator. She comes very ingenious, right? She a lot of ingenuity in her character. And that carries over in The Last Jedi as well. You see that through the movie, and in your book as well. She's that way. I was curious about where you came up with those kind of ideas, as far as like, there's a lot of specificity about different components of the engine, or this or that.
Like with the thing that she makes, the baffler thing.
Yeah.
I got some editorial guidance on that, actually, because I think I originally was fooling around with cloaking devices, and they're like, no, this isn't how cloaking devices work. I was like, my Star Wars lore was not as in depth as it maybe was supposed to be. So somebody else kind of helped me with that particular thing. I listened to the audiobook for the first time last year, or within this recent year. I had not listened to it before, and it's worth mentioning that Kelly Marie Tran reads it herself.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, she does a great job.
It's just wonderful.
I had forgotten. Like, you get for me, I got so involved in the story, I forgot I was listening to Kelly until the end when she says, "This is Kelly, and I've been
Yeah. So it's like you think Rose is telling you this story.
Oh,
right.
It was Kelly Marie Tran did such a great job of reading that audiobook. And again, for anybody watching, like, if you can pick up that audiobook, I got it from the public library system here. So you don't have to spend money to listen to it. It is absolutely worth your time. And if you just love Star Wars, you love to learn more about these characters, Kelly Marie Tran's reading of this novel is wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And what I was going to say was that because I was listening to the audio and not like reading the words that I'd written, whenever I listen to any of my books in audio, it always feels a little bit like I'm being told the story by, the narrator rather than I'm making it up. And I was, one of the things that really charmed me this time through was the little spaceship that they take when they go back to do their reconnaissance trip to the planet that's under siege.
Right.
And that ship was my creation. It's called the Little Vixen. And I had so much fun making up like what kind of ship that was going to be. I got to say, if you ask me who my favorite character in the whole Star Wars saga is, I will probably tell you the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, that's a good answer, actually. That's a really good answer.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I can't remember which of the, I guess it was the most recent one, then the Rise of Skywalker. Like it was the Millennium Falcon that made me cry.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm like, I have a soft spot in my heart. So being able to make up my own little ship with its own little idiosyncrasies, and that was actually a real pleasure to me. And also because it's like science fiction, you can make up how they're flying and, you know, sort of like what their capabilities are.
Uh-huh.
That's also fun to do. So that, and then some of the technical detail. I spent a lot of time on Wikipedia, which was also a new thing for me, because I'm just kind of, you know, a consumer of the films. I'm pretty normie as far as like a,
Sure.
a Star Wars. You know, I'm not that dedicated a fan.
Sure.
But this was all new to me as well, and so I had to, like, you know, find out just more about the background of what was available, you know, how big a ship has a cloaking device, and the far distant reaches of the galaxy, and some of the background of the New Order and all this stuff, which you had to have in your head in order to put the show together. The book.
Yeah.
And while the story, and while I was working on it, I was actually writing nonfiction. I can wave another book at you. I wrote this thing, which is 1,000 Sisters, and it is nonfiction for young adults, and it's subtitled "The Heroic Airwomen of the Soviet Union in World War II."
Oh.
So this is all true stuff about, like, women being bomber pilots and fighter pilots, but mostly actually working in bomber crews. And this was like the work that I was doing while I was writing this book. I sort of like took a little bit of a break from doing the research and the initial writing of this book to work on Cobalt Squadron. So there was a lot of background for me to draw from. And I kind of based the plot with the siege of the small planetary system on the siege of Leningrad, which I am very pleased that some reviewers have actually picked up on.
That is.
And somebody asked me what music, this was what during the year I was working on this, what do you listen to while you're writing? And what I was listening to over and over again was the Leningrad Symphony, Shostakovich.
Yeah.
Leningrad Symphony. And I was like, you know, I can't tell you because it's a spoiler.
That is great, and you're just scratching a couple of itches of mine. And I know you don't know this. When I was an undergrad studying for my degree, I did a lot of study in history, social studies, political science, and my area of concentration the whole time was in the Soviet Union. So
Right.
I'm very familiar with the references you're bringing up. And I was a social studies teacher in middle school here in the States for a couple years. And historic fiction is a fantastic way to engage young people with events of the past. And so I would work with our English teacher. We'd come up with a list of books that they could read to get double credit, right? Get history credit and English credit.
Yeah.
That would satisfy the curriculum. So this is fantastic. So that's where this falls in as well, right? It's historic fiction around the siege of Leningrad. That's
well. This is nonfiction.
Oh, nonfiction.
This is nonfiction, and it is about the 3 women's regiments who flew as combat pilots in World War II in the Soviet Union.
Oh boy! Wow.
Yep.
That's really cool. That is so cool. And what also makes that really so it's pretty awesome that Lucasfilm contacted you, because just your background with World War II pilots, and then this here because we know Rose and Paige specifically in The Last Jedi, is flying that bomber.
Yeah.
And it ties in perfectly to the bomber that you were just talking about there with that
Yeah.
nonfiction novel, so or book. So that's fantastic.
I mean, it was great for me because I was doing all this nonfiction stuff, and so here was kind of a chance to tell a story about the people I was writing about, even though it wasn't really the same people.
Right. But those connections are so good because we know that George Lucas in the dogfights borrowed a lot from war footage from Vietnam.
Yeah.
And
Actually, one of the things I was kind of told to look at when I was working on Cobalt Squadron was High Noon, the war film High Noon. Was it High Noon? I think so.
No.
I'll be really cross with myself if I've got the wrong war film here. Yeah, I'm sure it was High Noon. But it is about a bomber squadron, and the resistance bombers were kind of like, my understanding is that they were kind of vaguely based on B-17s,
Yeah.
Flying Fortresses.
Right.
So this was all in my area.
Yeah, kind of in your wheelhouse.
I had in 2014, so this is just a few years before, I'd actually had a flight in a Avro Lancaster bomber. There's only 2 of them still flying in the world.
Wow.
So that was also one of my great moments of my life, was like getting to see Niagara Falls from the gun turret of a Lancaster bomber.
Wow.
So again, I was able to kind of, it's not real experience, but you can draw on it as a fiction writer.
Sure, you were actually in the the physical structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Flying,
Yeah.
not just pretending. You were actually in there flying and got to see through what somebody who's sitting in there gets to see. Yeah. That is absolutely fantastic, and it really ties in because when I was listening to Cobalt Squadron, the story kind of built you into there, and you felt like Rose is talking to some other engineers, and as they're troubleshooting things go wrong, right? Things jiggle and jostle, and when things are happening, all of a sudden things quit working. You got to figure it out. And
that's actually one of the things I really like about the Star Wars universe in general. I love it when things. It's one of the things I love about the Millennium Falcon. It's like you have to keep hitting it to make it work, because that's what stuff is like,
That's exactly right. It's lived in, right? That's what they've always. That's fantastic. So, just curious, is Lucasfilm contacted about anything else?
Oh, I did actually write another. It was in 2017, because it was the 40th anniversary of the first Star Wars movie, and I wrote a short story for a collection that they did, and I got that here too. I carefully brought all my show and tell with me.
Oh, thank you.
So this is called From a Certain Point of View. Yeah. It does have the title on it somewhere there on the side.
Yeah.
From a Certain Point of View. And it is a collection of 40 short stories that are all by mostly people who are more famous than me. And they each story picks up on the point of view of a character in A New Hope, and or a character that might be in the background in A New Hope, but not one of the main characters, and sort of tells a story through their eyes. So I have a short story in that.
Which characters did you write about?
I wrote about those one of the 2 guys who follow Darth Vader around as his guards during Leia's interrogation scenes.
Oh, well, that's cool. Well, I don't know if you've seen The Gallery. It's a docu-series around the making The Mandalorian for Disney Plus. And the last episode of the gallery, they talk about deep cuts. And Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni were taking these kind of characters, the ones that are in the background scene that's just like standing at the bar, or you know, just part of a crowd, and they've gotten some Star Wars lore around them over time, and they then take these like deep cut characters and develop them into something in the story. And so that's along those same lines. It's a deep cut, if you will, right? It's the same idea. That is so cool. Anything else in the Lucasfilm vault at this point?
Nope,
Oh,
not at the moment. Not at the moment.
well,
It was.
go ahead.
I'm not even sure I would want to do it again in the immediate future, because it was actually really hard work, and it was very intense. And I have, like 3 other projects that I'm juggling, and as I say, it was intense, and I had to drop stuff to do it.
Oh yeah.
So I have not got anything in the pipeline. Maybe if another year or 2 goes by and something comes up, I'll be like, oh yeah, I would like to do that.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's a big push on, at least from a writing standpoint, on the High Republic and that project Luminous that they just did, and it's got all kinds of different authors involved around the Old Republic or New Republic era. So that seems to be what's going on from a literary standpoint, and who knows where they'll take things from here. I know that they're building around the same time frame what The Mandalorian is in, building out several different character arcs in there as well. So I just know that, and I mentioned earlier that getting to know Rose and Paige more, and get to know the bond they had, the background, how they were brought into service, and where their loyalty came from, all of that, and not only that, but their bond as sisters really made The Last Jedi more tragic when Paige is lost. So that's it's just a wonderful story, and that's what I mentioned a little bit in the review Friday as well, is that there are consequences in this book. Things happen, and there are real consequences to those things that happen. And again, I don't want to give away the story, because I want people to go consume it. I want them to read it for themselves, or listen to it themselves, because it's a true joy. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, like, this is easily in the top 3 or 4 books that I've listened to, and it was maybe just because my expectations were completely empty, and the story just came in, and it's exciting. There's, as I mentioned, there's consequences, there's character development. We get to know some of these sequel trilogy characters more, which is what a lot of fans want. They want to know, like, they feel like Finn's character was underutilized, or Rose's character was underutilized. And Rose has been one that's been mentioned over and over again after Rise of Skywalker, that her character was underutilized. And and this,
I have to say, I don't want to take any sides with anybody. I have to say, as the person who wrote a book about Rose, I felt that she was underutilized in Rise of Skywalker.
and the nice thing is, Cobalt Squadron helps us get to know one of these characters much more. Well, 2, right? Paige as well, but especially Rose, as she carries on. And that's why I asked the question about additional work, because Rise of Skywalker, Rose is so underutilized. Might we see more of her character developed along the lines of what we got in Cobalt Squadron?
If I knew the answer, I probably wouldn't be allowed to tell you.
That's probably true. That's probably true. So that's just wonderful. And I hope that for fans of Rose, that they're able to get more content of hers. And even if you're not a fan of Rose, if you just think she was a wasted character, she had nothing really consequential in the movies, if that's you, read this book, because the book helps you get to know Rose more, and at least connect to that character more. And it should help you enjoy the movie that much more.
Also, it shows the resistance bombers at work doing what they were built to do. So.
It really does. It really does, which is so cool, because that comes back into your experience with the other work you've done. And it plays in perfectly. Lucasfilm did a good job of getting you to write this book. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks.
such a good story. So we've kind of alluded to it a little bit. But if you've enjoyed, if like me, you enjoyed Cobalt Squadron, what else have you written that would tie into that? So first of all, I already have on my list the book that you shared, the nonfiction. But what else have you written?
A Thousand Sisters. Well, it just so happens, this is a beautiful little segue for me to do some self-promotion here. But it just so happens that this year I have a fiction book coming out. It's already been released in the UK, and it'll be released in the US on the 3rd of November, about a bomber squadron. So it is called The Enigma Game. This is the UK edition, and this is what the US edition is going to look like. This is an ARC, advanced review copy, which has not yet been released. And it is about, it takes place in Scotland. It's about 3 young people. It's got 3 different narrators, and they become involved in a stolen Enigma machine, which they use to sort of, try to change the fate of the squadron at the local airbase. Set in World War II, and it's also about the relationships between the different characters, who are all from very different backgrounds. One is the daughter of a Jamaican mother and an English father. One is one of the flight leaders. One is has grown up as a Scottish traveler, which is an indigenous nomadic people in Scotland whose lifestyle is being changed by changes in the modern era. So there's all kinds of things going on, and it is a thriller, and it's like there's scenes in the air, flying scenes, daring do, people being shot down over the North Sea. So if you want something that's actually quite similar to Cobalt Squadron, you couldn't go very far to check this out.
That's fantastic. When's it scheduled for release?
3rd of November.
3rd of November.
3rd of November in the U.S.
Wonderful.
From Little Brown Young Readers.
Oh, good. Well, we'll look for that. And like I said, and you mentioned you had another series around World War II that caught Lucasfilm's attention.
Yeah. Well, so that was Codename Verity is that's out now, and that's the one that's about the pilot and the spy. And again, you could not do better if you want to pick up another of my books than to pick this one up. And this is another book that has a fantastic audio version. If you like audiobooks, it's read by Morven Christie and Lucy Gaskell as the 2 different characters. And they just do a fabulous job interpreting this book.
And is that a series, or is it just a standalone?
Well, it's a standalone, but there's quite a few other books that are set in the same world. So actually, the Enigma Game, the one that's coming out this year, is kind of a prequel to Codename Verity. And there are 2 other books in that world. One is called Rose Under Fire, which takes place a little bit after Codename Verity and is about a young woman who's a transport pilot in World War II, and is she's forced to land over enemy territory, and she ends up being sent to the women's concentration camp at Ravensbrück. So it has quite a few different things going on. She gets involved with a group of women at Ravensbrück who have been had medical experiments performed on them, and she helps them to stage a revolt. And so there's all kinds of things going on in that. It's loosely in the Code Name Verity world, but it's not really the same characters.
Gotcha.
And then there's yet another one in that same world, which takes place in 1938, so just before the war. And that's more of a sort of mystery and coming of age novel. That's called The Pearl Thief, and that's set in Scotland, where I live, and there's no flying in it.
Oh, that's okay. That's just fun, wonderful. There's, I think I'll just end on one Star Wars question, and it's just if you were to be able to pick any era to revisit as an author, what might you pick? Would you revisit Rose, or would it, like go back to that certain point of view kind of thing? What would excite you most about just being able to write something related to the Star Wars universe?
I think I would like to, look into the early history of the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, that'll be really good.
Yeah, I would enjoy that. I can just imagine it, and it's like when it was new.
Right.
State of the art. What was it designed for? All this stuff. So
that'd be fun.
Who owned it?
Oh, that is great. Well, Elizabeth, again, thank you so much. I'll try to put some links in the video to your page, and as well as references to the books themselves. It's just been a joy just to get to spend some time with you. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much. I have to say, it's a real pleasure to have someone, sudden open my mailbox and see, oh, I just loved Cobalt Squadron. I'd like to talk to you about it, because it hasn't made a huge splash on the scene, and it's nice to get a little love for it. Really,
well, it deserves more attention for sure, and I hope people find it and people take time to read it, because it's absolutely a joy to read. And I wouldn't say that about every book that I've read, but people are attracted to different stories for different reasons. And this one happened to hit on several things that I truly enjoyed. And I hope other people will take some inspiration, go out there and consume it. It's absolutely worth your time. Trust me on this. It's worth your time to listen to if you can pick it up on audiobook. And Kelly Marie Tran does such a great job. You can't go wrong. You cannot go wrong. Trust me, it's good. So, Elizabeth, thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording here, and
okay.
And thanks again.